Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Cliff Neve, and I'm the Vice President of Maritime Cybersecurity for MAD Security, and I'd like to talk about something I hear constantly from maritime executives, port leaders, and vessel operators: cost. And increasingly, this conversation is happening in the context of the Coast Guard's final rule on maritime cybersecurity in the marine transportation system. But beyond compliance, this is really about how leaders think about risk. Most maritime leaders ask the same thing when cybersecurity comes up. How much is this really going to cost us? That question is coming up more often now because the Coast Guard has formally established cybersecurity as part of MITSA compliance. But the more important question is, what does inaction cost us operationally, especially now that cyber risk is explicitly a regulatory concern? The Coast Guard final rule doesn't just ask for documents. It expects organizations to demonstrate governance, accountability, and execution. The same things we've talked about operationally for years. When we talk about compliance costs, what you're really paying for is cybersecurity leadership, clearly assigned responsibility, controls that work in a real operational environment, the ability to respond to incidents. That alignment is exactly what the final rule is designed to drive in your organization. The final rule also creates an important reality. Cybersecurity is no longer optional, it's no longer episodic. That leads to some organizations to assume that they need to build everything internally. But the rule does not require a specific staffing model. It requires effective risk management and response capability. Scalable approaches like fractional leadership and shared monitoring can meet the Coast Guard's expectations without forcing maritime organizations into permanent overhead. When the Coast Guard talks about cybersecurity in the marine transportation system, they're not talking about data breaches. They're talking about disruption to maritime operations. Cyber incidents that delay vessels, slow terminals, or force manual operations are exactly the kinds of impacts the final rule is designed to address because they directly affect safety and commerce. And that's what the final rule is designed to guard for and against. Under the final rule, cyber incidents don't just trigger internal response. They can trigger regulatory scrutiny. That means that post-incident reviews, increased inspection attention, and questions about whether required controls were actually in place or not. When incidents happen now, the question isn't just what happened, it's were you meeting your cybersecurity obligations under the Maritime Transportation Security Act? What's interesting is that one of the elements of the Coast Guard's final rule was a bullet that said that in addition to having controls in place, in addition to having policies in place, that the organization had to actually be doing them in practice. And I thought that was kind of funny because it's generally assumed that that's the case. But there's a reason the Coast Guard put that in there, and that's because paper compliance isn't gonna get it done. It's not gonna get you where you need to be. So one of the risks we're seeing with the final rule is the rise of paper compliance, as I said, documents that technically reference cybersecurity but don't reflect real operational capability. The Coast Guard has been clear. Compliance must be meaningful and executable. That means that you need to bring your operations folks to the table. This is not an IT exercise. This is not just a compliance exercise. The operational folks who are operating the equipment and dealing with the realities and constraints of these policies have to be included at the start. So organizations that rely on one-time assessment or self-aware plans often discover during an incident or during an inspection that they didn't actually reduce risk. When you compare these paths side by side, the decision becomes clear. Compliance aligned with the Coast Guard final rule should be planned, budgetable, defensible during inspections. An incident response without that foundation, you will find to be reactive, expensive, and very difficult to justify after the fact. It's a very tough conversation to have once something has happened, to go back through and have an audit done after the fact and not be able to have a good story is a rough place to be. Again, compliance is predictable, incidents are not. The Coast Guard final rule didn't create cyber risk in maritime, but it did make it impossible to ignore. It's now explicitly part of operational safety, regulatory compliance, and executive accountability in the marine transportation system. If you're unsure how prepared you really are, start with clarity. A short consultation often reveals whether your current approach actually aligns with the rule and where the real costs are hiding. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time, cliff@madsecurity.com, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you and have a great day.